Hi again, Venkat. How are you?
Greetings. How are you?
All good. Yeah, you today is the very first speaker, so you open our event actually. How do you feel with that?
Oh, thank you so much for having. I want to express my respects and greetings to the people of Ukraine. Shout out to the developers that I consider as friends, and I can't wait for the freedom of Ukraine and being there in person. So, thank you again for all the effort to organize it, and thanks for everyone who joined.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I know it's not your the first time when you joined our event. You had talks on our previous Java Day events and even in person. Yeah.
Yes, and I've always enjoyed being there, and I'm looking forward to much better times and for everything to turn the right way.
Yeah, indeed. I also looking forward for our future events and to have it really live, not in online mode. And yeah, do you prepare some cool insights about new Java, latest Java, and something maybe totally insightful? Yeah,
Absolutely. I'm excited about where Java is heading and eager to talk about some of the things that I've enjoyed using in recent times.
cool. Can't wait to see something new and learn something new also from your talk. And don't want to keep you any longer. And good luck with your talk. And let's get started.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, thanks, Oleg, and organizers, and greetings everyone for joining. Before we get started, please do take the time to post your questions or comments on the chat. And I'm going to speak for roughly about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you do post a question or a comment, we will be able to take a look at it and then discuss those towards the end as well. And of course, anytime along the way, post a question or a chat. If I get to see it, I'll be able to respond to it right away. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A in the end as well. So we can do both a combination of Q&A along the way and in the end as well. So with that said, let's get started. I cannot tell you how excited I am with the trend and the development in Java. I call it "This ain't your parents' Java." Well, of course, I've been programming in Java for a very long time. I started programming in Java soon after Java was released, and there are a lot of developers who have used Java over the years. Java is well over 25 years old, if my memory is right, like 28 years old. So it's a long time that it's been around. But I will be absolutely honest about this to you. I was one of those guys on the other side of the picket line, constantly complaining that Java is moving too slow. If you ever look at one of the videos from 2010 and before, you will hear me talk about how Java is so slow in moving. In fact, I've saved these away. I used to get hate emails from people saying, "We hate you, Venkat, because you hate Java." Well, I didn't hate Java. I did hate the very slow development. All that for me changed with the release of Java 8, because until the time of Java 8, we were able to do imperative style and object-oriented style of programming, both of which are very useful. But the world actually has been really looking at adopting the good old functional style of programming. And with Java 8, of course, as we all know, we can do imperative, object-oriented, and functional style of programming as well. So that has been a remarkable development. And I would say, by far over the years, not including a few recent changes, that has been a very significant change in Java. Java 5 was extremely important. After that, Java 8 was super important after that. Now, we all took the time to learn and embrace the ability to do functional style of programming in Java. Well, Java 10, of course, introduced local variable type inference. You don't have to type the full type information. The compiler can infer that for you. And I often see this like a signpost, if you will. When I move to a city, which I'm not familiar with, the signs on the streets were very useful. And they were useful exactly once. And soon after that, they were not very useful because I know exactly where the post office is or the library is. And a type is a lot like that if we have a good variable name. Of course, it takes effort and time to get used to enjoying type inference, but I find this to be a very valuable feature. But something else happened right after Java 10. And the folks behind the Java language, the world speaks about agile development. And I get really excited and happy to see when somebody is able to do agile development the right way. And I give full credit and appreciate what the Oracle team behind Java has really done. They are truly agile in the sense of agility. And I want to really start with this by emphasizing this here. And I want to specify that clearly that Java, I would say, is not being developed on a 6 months cycle. This is one of the key things for us to understand when it comes to agile development. Well, back in time, when they were developing Java, they had a very similar problem like the rest of us do. And they did something really terrible in terms of how we develop and manage projects. They would, first of all, decide what feature goes into a particular version, whether it's Java 4, 5, 6, or 7, and so on. And then they would have their developers behind the Java language spend their time and effort developing the features. Now, as you would expect, they were really, expecting and desiring the ability to release, every 2 years. But as they started developing the features, some of them would get done, some of them are still developing. And when they went around, it was time to push the release, they would ask how things are going. And they were giving answers not very different from what you and I give to our bosses. So when they were asked how things are going, they said, well, it's almost done. Well, almost done really meant 7 years later. So they were really struggling to release Java with all these features, and they realized the true meaning of agility. And agility is not about planning ahead, but it is about adapting the plan continuously. So adaptive planning is extremely important for agile development. So Java is not being developed on a 6 month cycle. For example, that one feature we saw in Java 10 about local variable type inference, they took 5 years to develop it. The feature more recently on virtual threads, they took 12 years to implement it. So Java is not being developed on a 6 month cycle. However, Java is being released on a 6 month cycle. That is one of the biggest differences, if you will, in terms of how Java is being agile. So Java is being released on a 6 month cycle. So every 6 months, there is a release of Java starting from Java 11. And of course, now we are in Java 22, expecting Java 23 around the corner. But what goes into a release is decided based on what is ready for release, not something that is determined well ahead of time. And as two examples before we get into the code, let's talk about it. In Java 12, I remember they were really talking about this raw string feature, but 3 weeks before the release, it was not to be found because they realized that they need to really rework on it. So that was again taken away. And Java 13, we had the text block feature that was released with more power. And that really brings up to one of the really nice, interesting ways it's being developed. One of the things about agile development, I would say, is adaptive planning. But it also is agile development. You can say development itself, I would argue, this is one of the most important things is feedback-driven development. So Java is being released as a pre-release, and any feature being introduced to Java stays as a pre-release at least for 2 releases to enjoy that feedback loop, and potentially even more if it becomes necessary. So we are able to use those features, provide feedback, and help direct the changes before it gets committed as a final release into the language. That to me is true agility as well. So that is basically the nature of how Java is being developed today. I want to talk about a few interesting features that I see in Java that is very exciting. And the first one starts with a switch expression. But before we talk about the switch expression, I want you to think about the words that we often use, and that is really statement versus expression. And sometimes we could be programming in these things for years and not think about some fundamental differences. By nature, statements, really, cause a side effect. So, in other words, statements do not return any response to the caller. So, by their nature, for a statement which is non-trivial to be useful, it has to cause side effect. Has mutation often. So obviously, these are not really great ideas, especially from the functional programming point of view. On the other hand, expressions return result and do not often, have or do not, have to have side effects. So a good expression shouldn't have any side effects and don't have to cause mutation. And that got me thinking, honestly, if a language, which is Java is not, and a lot of other languages are hybrid functional programming languages, but if you think of a pure functional programming language in the area of like Haskell and Erlang, it got me thinking, if a language is purely functional, then it should be filled with expressions and not statements. So as a result, we should really prefer, if you will, expressions, if as much as you can, over statements as much as you can, because statements do not cause side effect. Statements are much more easier to reason with, and in functional programming, we often use more statements more expressions rather than statements. So try to model your code with more expressions rather than statements. Well, in that regard, one of the changes in Java is where the switch statement has evolved into a switch expression. Let's take a look at an example of this just to get a feel for it. So let's say we have a bunch of values here. Let's say a 56, let's say a 65, let's say a 74, and 88, let's say a 93, and maybe a 101. Let's start with these values. So I'm going to say for all these values, I want to do a map and say, in this case, I will simply call a sample, and we'll call a function called grade. And once we call the grade function, I want to be able to display the result of it. So for each, we'll say system.out, and we'll just print it right now. We'll take this in gradual steps and implement it. So I want to implement the grade function. So we'll say, in this case, a string grade. I said, we'll take right here, in this particular case, we will return whatever like so. So in this, as you can see, we are returning a result, but I want to be able to return a grade for that particular value. How do we proceed doing it? So in this particular case, let's go ahead and say a string will start with a grade is equal to, we'll provide an F as a starting point, return grade. Hopefully we can do a lot better than that rather than having F for every score. Then we can say if, let's say, a grade or rather score is greater than, in this particular case, a 9 or equal to a 90, maybe we'll give a grade of A, but what if it is not? So we can do a else, and we can do if score is greater than or equal to a 80, maybe we'll simply return, in this case, a value for the grade, and we can say a grade is equal to a B, and of course, else, and you can see where this is going. This is going to turn into a monster. I wouldn't even bother writing this code right now. I actually worked with a client not too long ago. I'm not exaggerating. They had 169 levels of if and else. I asked their developers, how do you maintain this code? And they said, we don't. The people who wrote this code don't work here anymore. If we ever have to change it, we do a rock, paper, scissors and find a victim to touch that code, right? No, that's horrible code. We don't want to write code like that. Well, of course, in the past, we could, and the present, we could use a switch statement. So we can say over here, let's say min, and we could say a score divided by 10 or a 10. And then we can say in this case, if the case is going to be a value of 10, maybe we can specify that the grade is equal to a A in this case. So we could start by saying we could do a much more concise, if you will, than the if and else disaster we would be creating. And of course, we could say grade is equal to a F if it were to be really none of those that we consider. So then we could say, for example, along the way, we could say this is going to be maybe a B, a C, maybe a D, and maybe an F over here. But of course, we also need to consider the value of 9 as well. So we'll say if it's greater than 90, if it's greater than 80, greater than 70, greater than 60 gets a D, and anything less than that, let's say, is going to get an F. So we could write code like that and return the grade, and we could say something like, for example, the grade for, we'll say, score, and we could say in this particular case, the score itself. So score, let's say, is, and we could implement the value of the grade like so. So it looks like, hey, that's really a nice idea. We could write the code using a switch statement, if you will. But you probably noticed the problem on this already, or it is easy to miss that as well. When you run the code, oh my dear, everybody got an F. What a terrible course it is. What a terrible instructor it is, right? Now we realize what went wrong here. We forgot to put a break statement. That's right. Break is a statement because the switch was a statement. Now, obviously, we want to do better than statements and have these less error-prone code. This is where switch can become a nice expression. So as you would expect, you can store the result of an expression into a variable or even return it to the caller. So as a result here, no more of those silly breaks. We can get rid of those. And no more of that mutation as well. We can get rid of those as well in here, if you will. So we can get rid of those mutations from here, as you can see. And we can shorten the code as well. Right there, as you can see, a lot less code to work with. And then we change the semicolon that you see up here into a little arrow that is nothing to do with lambda expressions, but we are turning that into an expression rather than a statement. So you can see the code is less error prone, easier to write, more concise, and yet it's an expression, as you can see in here. So that is one of the nice things about a switch expression. But of course, a switch starts out as an expression, but grows into a full-blown pattern matching syntax. Over the years, I've enjoyed pattern matching in languages like Haskell and Erlang and Scala and Kotlin and Ruby and so on, and Python. Well, I really appreciate Java having a very nice pattern matching. We'll see that later on. So you can see how this became a nice expression. You can also remove some of these redundancies as well by combining the labels together. And if you have a multi-line, you can also do a multi-line as well. So maybe that requires a bit of an auditing. You can do that as well here by simply putting a yield, and you can return the value like so, and then you can put multiple lines of code right here as well if you need to, though I strongly recommend writing a separate function and calling it, but that goes into better quality code we could be writing. So that gives you the idea of a switch expression. Well, it also takes us to the pattern matching syntax, but for that, they really needed to introduce an idea called the pattern matching with instance of, they call it, because that's the end goal of this feature. But they wanted to really start with smart casting, as other languages like Kotlin and Ruby call it. So let's explore this. And again, along the way, if you do have a question or a comment, and I do hope that you have a question or a comment, please post them on the chat and I can respond to them right away if I see it. If not, or if we need to spend more time on it, we'll discuss that towards the end as well. If you like a feature, put that on the comment. If you don't like a feature, that's perfectly fine as well. Put that on the comment. If you have used something and you enjoy it, put that on the comment. If you have not tried something and you're intrigued by it and you want to look at it and use it, put that on the comment, right? The beauty of being online. You know, I started saying this. Online sessions should start with this particular phrase. We want to read out what I would like to call as the reverse Miranda rights. Miranda rights says you have the right to remain silent. The reverse Miranda right, you have right not to remain silent. We have the freedom to speak anytime we want to speak, and do so, exercise your freedoms to speak. So do post your comments, do post your thoughts as well. And Coyle says, new switch expression is great. I love those expressions, and switch especially, I cannot tell you. Over the years, I've really used switch kind of structure in other languages. I often refactor my code to use it to make it more expressive, and that's exactly what I'm beginning to do in Java as well these days along the way also. So yeah, switch expressions are beautiful. I completely agree. I love that particular feature. Now let's talk about the one more interesting feature here. We'll call this one as process, and we'll process a 1, but I will also process a hello here as well to appreciate this next feature we're going to see. So I'm going to say in here, let's say we'll call this as process. It takes some kind of an object for message processing, let's say, and I'm going to say return whatever for now again. But I want to know what the type of this is. So if I say if input is an instance of a integer, I want to simply say in here, return got a number. So that's cool. If it's an integer, it says got a number. However, I say if the input is an instance of a string, I'm going to say right here, return got a string. Well, good start so far, but I want to know what the length of that string is. So I'm going to say of length, and I'm going to specify the length, if you will. So, but what is the length? I'm going to say equal to input.length and call that particular function on it. Now the question is, will this work? Will this code compile properly? And will this code work? And as Java programmers, you know the answer already, that it would give us a compilation error. What does the error say? It says method length is not available on the variable of type object. Now, obviously, for this to work, you will have to go back to this code and say string, and then you would have to perform that little extra effort around this code. And you're saying, I want to take this particular object that's given, and I want to really convert that into that reference from an object type reference. I want to convert that into really, in this particular case, a string type of a reference, isn't it? So obviously you can remove some of the parentheses in this case eventually, but all I'm doing is I'm saying, give me that particular string reference. So we want a reference in this case of type string from a reference of type object. Now, anyone remembers what that feature is called in the case of Java, where you take a reference type, but you move it to another type for a reference? Anyone remembers what that feature is called in Java? Well, it's a very common feature in a lot of languages. We've been doing a lot of that in languages like C++. It's got an origin for that back in time as well. So they call it casting. I call it punishment. So you can see this is not a really great idea. Now think about this for a minute. Maybe you have a colleague at work and you see them leave the building in the evening. You ask them where they are going and they say, I'm going to catch that movie I've not seen for a long time. You say, hey, that's great. Have a good one. See you tomorrow. Well, the next morning you see them. You ask them, hey, did you go to the movie? They say, yes, I did. And how was it? And they ask you, how was what? you're not going to really entertain the conversation anymore, right? You're going to roll your eyes and walk away because you just ask them how was the movie and then how was it. So clearly it means the movie. That's how we communicate as humans. But look at what Java did. You said, hey, Java, is that a string? Oh, yes, it is. What's the length of what? Well, seriously? So that's not really effective code, isn't it? Well, thankfully, you don't have to do these kinds of mundane things anymore. You can simply go back here and you can say stir.length, where you can say stir is a variable that you introduce right there. And as a result, it's able to use that variable. So what just went on? In one shot, we said object input is referring to a variable in memory, and that variable in memory gets a string, the stir. So in other words, input is exactly the same location as a stir in memory. Now the scope of that variable, if you will, is only within this block of code. So it only is in this block of code, the curlies, as you can see, being highlighted. When you step out of that block, that variable is no longer available. So that is the scope of that variable as well. So again, we'll see the benefit of this smart casting a little later on, but I want to talk quickly about yet another feature, which is the feature of text blocks. So if I were to say a greet right here and call the greet function, and again, we can say here is a string greet. Well, we have done this in the past where I want to return a message where the message is going to be, let's say, a string, hello, let's say there, but then every one of us has written a code like this before, message plus equal to, how are you? Oh, and you could say, I need to really put maybe a /n, and we think of the delimiters across the platforms as well. And then that can be error prone. And then I'm going to say it is, let's say, a double quote. So I have to escape, great to see you. And in this case, virtually. And I'm going to say message plus equal to, let's say, thank you for coming. So essentially, in this particular case, we took a lot of effort to write that particular code. And this is not a code you would display to the world. This is the code you would hide from humanity. This is not an exciting piece of code, as you can see. So unfortunately, this is a type of code we all have written. No more. You can simply go back to this code, and what you can do is you can simply put 3 double quotes to start a multi-line string or a text block. You can get rid of all those silly /n's that you tried to do incorrectly before. And you can simply say, I want to write the multi-line string, and here is the how are you. And similarly, you can get rid of the escapes as well. You don't need them. You can directly put the strings within the multi-line strings. So in this case, you can see we reduce the verbosity quite a bit. So now when I run the code, you can see from the output that you can see the multi-line string. But just to emphasize it, if I were to go back and put a few dashes in here, you can see that it was removing the indentations very smartly. So that is called a smart indentation. So the compiler knows that you did not really mean those indentations. Those were really for the code indentation. So if I were to indent this a lot more, as you can see in here, you can see the indentation appear right there in the code. So those indentations were removed, and this is essential, so it kept it. So text blocks have some really interesting features like that, where it has smart indentation, and it also removes the spaces from the end as well automatically. So here I added some spaces to those lines, which of course you're not able to see, but just for us to be able to see it and appreciate it, let's say replace all, and I want to replace all the spaces with a little tilde so we can see where the spaces are. But more important, notice the spaces are not towards the end of those lines. Those spaces were automatically removed. But if you do want to keep those spaces, you can put a /s, and you can see it preserves the space on one line, but it removed it from the other line where we did not use a /s. So this is another feature that works really nicely. So oftentimes we copy and paste these documents from other locations, and we don't have to waste the time removing those spaces which are usually not necessary. So a lot of smartness has gone into it as well. That's a feature of text blocks. Well, I want to talk about records and sealed classes next and how they interplay with pattern matching. So 3 more features I want to talk about quickly before we wrap this up. So I want to talk about the records. I'm a big fan of records. So for example, if I were to say, in this case, a person, let's say a person 1 equal to new person, we'll say Alan, let's say Turing, and I want to create the person a couple of times. So person 2 and person 3, and let's go ahead and call this one as Walker. Now I want to output person 1. Now, how do I create the class for the person? We would have written person class, and we would define a private string, let's say a first name. We would return a private string, a last name. Are we done? No, we would be writing a constructor. We'd be writing a getter, and so on. And after all that effort, when you output the object, it would give something that's not very useful. That was a lot of effort. You say, come on, Venkat, we don't do that. We define the field and we gently right click on it, and then watch the IDE spit out and vomit the getters and setters. Well, then we have to live with that IDE vomit for a long time. Well, good news, we don't have to do that anymore. Records are immutable classes which are final behind the scene. So record person, string first name, and you can say string last name as well. Very highly concise piece of code. So when you run this code, you can see how you got a meaningful output which you can customize. But here's the beauty. What I really like about this is records give you a buy 1, get 5 free offer. Who doesn't want such an offer, right? We are very happy often if we get a buy 1, get 1 free, but this is buy 1, get 5 free. And even for that one, you don't have to pay anything. How cool that is, right? So what is that 5 free things? By a record, you got a constructor, you got the getters automatically, you have a toString method, you have an equals method, and you have a hash code method all given to you. You can customize any of these, but those are given to you. So we can see this in action. You can say dot first name, and that's a getter that you can see being given to you right there automatically. Similarly, you can say over here, a person 1 dot equals person 2, versus you could say person 1 dot equals person 3. You can see a true versus a false as an output. So it performs the equality, and since all the field, or they call it component, values are exactly the same between those 2 persons, the result is a true versus a false for the last one. So similarly, all these functions are baked in, and you can create a record. Records are final, record values are immutable. Well, you have to be careful what you stuff into a record. So don't put anything mutable as a component. And finally, of course, records cannot be extended. They can implement an interface, but you cannot extend from a class. They are final. You cannot inherit from them either. So it really tightens a lot of stuff. But like I said, not only are records really great, the way they interplay with pattern matching is pretty awesome. So we'll get to that a little later. But that brings us to the sealed classes I want to show you next. And sealed classes help us to create a closed hierarchy. So suppose I have an interface called trade, And then I have, let's say, a record in this particular case. Let's go ahead and say a record, which is going to be, we'll call this one as cell, which takes a string, a ticker, and takes a integer quantity, and also it implements, let's say, a trade. So here is a cell, and similarly, I have a buy as well as two things, as you can see sitting right there. So given this, I want to be able to say output, we'll say process, and we'll say new cell, let's say Goog, and we want to sell maybe 200 shares of Google. Similarly, I want to say a buy, and let's say a buy of, let's say APPL, and I want to buy maybe 300 shares of it. So I can start writing the function right here for the process, and we can say process, and it takes a trade as an input that is going to come in, and we can start working with the trade. But the question is, how do you limit the trade to be one of these two so people don't introduce their own type of trade? So this is where you want to close your hierarchy. People can use the classes you provide, they can use the interface you provide, where they shouldn't be implementing the interface or extending your classes. So in other words, you don't want them to create a fake trade, for example. So this is where you can say a sealed interface, and you can add permits, in this case, a sell and a buy. So this simply says you can only sell or buy. So it's a sealed interface called trade, which permits a sell and it permits a buy as well. So for now, let's simply return whatever. We'll come back and implement this code in a minute. And you can see in this case that code actually worked. But if you were to add a record or a class, doesn't matter. So in this case, let's just say a class, and we'll call this as a fake trade for whatever reason, implements, let's say, trade. Notice what's going to happen. Well, you get an error saying class is not allowed to extend the sealed class or an interface called trade because it's not part of the permits. So this allows you to contain what you're allowed to really have in terms of the extensions. So this, to give you an example of this, I've got a client who creates a system where their clients can introduce plugins. They want the people writing the plugins to use their interfaces and classes, but they don't want people to implement their interfaces or extend their classes. How do you implement such a rule? Well, there are several ways you can try. This one really streamlines the way to actually do that, becomes a lot easier as well. So that is one of the nice things about having this particular approach of sealed classes and sealed interfaces. But like I mentioned, not only is pattern matching superb, the way these features interplay with that is amazing as well. So let's look at the pattern matching syntax. So I'm going to say return, and we can write a switch on the trade right there. This is the last feature I want to show you. Well, almost the last feature. So I want to say a case. This is a sell, and I'm going to say we are selling. We'll just say selling. And likewise, we can say over here, we have a buy, and we can put a buy here, and we say we are buying. We'll start with that. And typically you would write a default. And what do you do with the default? Well, we can say invalid trade, which we did not expect. So let's start with that really quickly. But here's the beauty. The compiler knows whether you need a default or not. In this case, you don't need a default. But why? The reason is the hierarchy is sealed. So if you don't have a case for a buy, you are going to really, as you can see, get an error. So this is basically saying that, hey, you need to really have all the cases covered. But since we have all the cases covered, we can really ignore that. Yeah, great point from Oleg. This is relating to data-oriented programming. And how so? Well, we typically use polymorphism in object-oriented programming, which is very valuable, no doubt about it. But the problem with that approach is we got to create a class hierarchy. And if it's a third-party classes, if you want to enjoy polymorphism to process the data of the type, you end up creating a parallel hierarchy, which is not a great solution, even though it is an object-oriented solution. So now you have two tools, pardon me. Now you have two tools on your hand. You can use polymorphism, and object-oriented programming where it makes sense. You can also use data-oriented programming as well. What a beautiful combination of the two. So absolutely great comment. Thank you for that. So essentially in this particular case, we can use the switch expression. But going a little further into this, we can simply say, hey, I want to know how much I'm selling and what I'm selling. We are selling, and we could say sell dot ticker plus we could say sell dot quantity as well. And as you can see here, we are able to specify those things. But this is where not only can you use pattern matching, we can mix that with destructuring as well. So rather than writing such a verbose code, you can simply say a cell, and you can simply write a string, a ticker, and into quantity, you can even put a Q, and simply you can change this to a ticker, and you can change that to a Q as well, like so, as you can see in this particular case. So this is the concept of destructuring, where you can extract the parameters. So construction or structuring is creating an object from properties. Destructuring or deconstruction is the reverse. What you are doing is you are extracting, in this case, these local variables from the properties of objects. Waldemar says, I am wondering if it's possible to specify interface within permits. Is it possible in that case implement and use multiple classes based on interface specify in permits? A really good point. So you are saying I got a bunch of interfaces, but a class can implement those interfaces. The answer is yes. Brilliant, brilliant question. The answer is yes, because a class can implement multiple interfaces. It still follows that criteria, and you would generally mark that class as final, but you can implement them from multiple interfaces. Nothing to stop you from doing it. Absolutely brilliant. It is quite likely that a class might implement the two interfaces, each of which have a restriction of seed. And also, one may be sealed, the other may not be sealed as well. All those flexibilities exist. Absolutely brilliant. So essentially in this case, and again, thank you so much for that question / comment. That's how we expand our thinking. So I really appreciate those thoughts. Beautiful. So now, given this, of course, you can also go a little further with this. Maybe I'm really interested in the quantity and not the ticker itself. This is where this beautiful unnamed variable feature really comes in. So you can say underscore comma into quantity, and we are buying, you could say a plus, you could specify the quantity of what you're buying as well. So what does the underscore really represent? Well, in this case, we can say string underscore, and we don't care about that particular variable, which we are not going to use after all. So you can specify that. Well, eventually you could use a pattern matching with the underscore mixed with type inference as well. So that is something we're heading towards. But rather than using cryptic variable names, or I often say the word ignore, you are nicely able to simply specify an underscore saying, I don't care about it. Well, I showed you a number of features in the evolutions. One I will not cover here is about concept of virtual threads and continuations, an amazing concept. I think this is going to be one of the most significant things moving forward in Java. Just like how we say how Java 8 has been the most important change, I think we would be saying virtual threads are one of the most important changes in Java. Amazing capability for asynchronous programming as well. So Java is evolving at a very pragmatic rate. They're not simply infatuated, sitting there and saying, let's hack Java. No, quite the opposite. They're looking at three things. They're looking at features whether they are actually useful in the language. Then they ask the question if the features are really feasible to implement. Then they ask the question, what impact would it have on future development of Java? So they are very, I would say Java is growing very responsibly, if you will. Oleg says, I'm using double underscore before single has been allowed. Oh, bad idea, Oleg. But I sympathize with you. I see why you're doing it. But now we can do better. I like your smiley, knowing that tongue in cheek, like not the best thing to do, right? And of course, Java is power packed with these features, and they're also looking at future demands as well. For example, when you saw the destructuring, why not simply use destructuring for regular classes? Well, sure, you can eventually write the deconstructor just like you write a constructor, and you can have destructuring on regular objects as well. So some exciting changes coming every 6 months in the language that we all love and use. Waldemar says, is it possible to specify if clause within if yeah, as in Scala? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I don't know what if clause within if means. Apologies for not knowing that. But you can specify a guarded pattern matching that you can do. So you can say when within your pattern matching. So in here you can say a quantity when you can specify q is greater than 1,000, for example, and you can write code like that. So you have a guarded pattern matching available. So that is where I'm going to stop this discussion. I hope you found this useful. I want to bring in the moderator. I want to have a few minutes to talk about Q&A. Any questions you may have, anything you are interested. I do see a comment or question from Artem. Is it possible to have multiple unnamed variables? Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Yes. You can have multiple unnamed variables as well. Absolutely. You are right. And you can do that as well. Well, that's all I have for the talk. I'll be delighted to answer your questions. So if the moderator want to jump into the video and have a discussion and read out some questions or comments, I'm most welcome to come in and join, and then we can wrap this up. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for such insightful talk, Venkat. Yeah, was really great. And indeed, Java evolving pretty rapidly, so and a lot of features. So our goal just to use them correctly and not just because they exist in the Java. Yeah. And I saw that you already answered a few questions during your talk. And I see we have one more from Max. Is it worth changing all switch statements to the new, all DTOs, POJO classes to records if I migrate a legacy project from a Java 8 to latest Java? I want to update the code to use new Java features. I have doubts.
Very good question. Very good question. And I want to be very cautious in answering that. I'm not a fan of changing existing code for the sake of changing it ever. So I want to be very responsible in what we do. Our time and focus should be on delivering value to our customers. So my recommendation is don't go on a mission to change everything. The general rule I follow is if you are changing a piece of code, fixing a bug, making an enhancement, you are improving some code or adding some functionality. In other words, if you're touching a piece of code for other reasons, that's a great time to refactor it. And at that time, refactor the code to use the newer features. Don't just go off and spend the time modifying existing code. There's another reason I say this with all respect. We all have good intentions, but we also know that a lot of projects don't have enough automated testing. So there's a risk of introducing errors when we touch a piece of code as well. So if we only modify the code when we touch it for other reasons, then we spend the effort on a limited area. We can put a lot better effort in making sure all that is working really well, and we can improve it. If we're doing random changes, we're not giving it enough attention. So the answer to Max's question is, yes, there is value but proceed with caution, proceed incrementally doing that as well, only when a piece of code is going to change for other reasons.
Yeah, definitely. Good point. And we also have one more question directly from our hosting location. Yeah.
Hey Venkat, you did great. Much appreciated it. So I love you so much like a speaker. You always do good. You always do interesting. It's very important for watchers. And I have a very interesting question for you. So the question is, what a new improvement or feature would you suggest for Java that doesn't currently exist yet? What is missing in Java? Or you
Oh my gosh.
fully happy with Java?
Well, so first of all, thank you. You're very kind. That is a very hard question to answer. And the reason why that's a very hard question to answer is I'm often like the kid in the candy store. When I work with multiple languages, I'm like, "Ooh, look at this, look at this, look at this." And in fact, for example, a couple of years ago, or maybe a few years ago, there was a day I was programming in Kotlin and JavaScript, and I tweeted, today's tweet is sponsored by destructuring. And Brian gets answered the tweet saying, "I will neither confirm nor deny if destructuring will be in Java." Well, clearly now we know that we have destructuring Java as well. So I get excited about features as I work in multiple different languages. Things like pattern matching and destructuring are things I've been really excited about. I don't think I can put my fingers on one feature I would really like to have in the language. That's a hard question to answer. There are so many things I see in a lot of different languages that I wish we were able to do in Java, but I don't think I can honestly pick one and say that's what I really want. But what I can emphasize to you is that the feature I would want to have in Java is the one that reduces unnecessary verbosity. That's always a big deal. For example, right, when you're dealing with code with enormous complexity, how can you throw away all those complexity and make it simpler and easier to use? Again, things like features in Python or Ruby that I often end up using, you can see some of those trickling into Java as time goes on. But that's what I would say, is to really focus on the projects we are working on. If you feel like there are certain things you're doing in Java that can be much easier, then send that off. For example, I'm a huge fan of generics that are really working properly. Everyone knows me knows that I don't like generics. Reification of generics. I often jokingly say this. I'm pretty old right now. I'm not far from retirement. And I always say, before I retire, I want to be able to create a list of INT. So the value types and reification in generics is a feature I'm really looking forward to. And honestly, the reason I like that feature is I recently worked on a big data project, and we had a lot of performance issues, not from anything you would imagine. The issues came from garbage collection. The reason we had issues in garbage collection is so much memory was creating on the heap, and we spent time garbage collector running those. Value types with generic reification would remove so much burden from the garbage collector, because when you leave a stack, those can get garbage collected instantaneously. So if you personally ask me from real experience, not as a infatuated, oh, it'll be cool. I'm not a fan of coolness. I'm a fan of what actually affects my bottom line. So from a direct use from a project I worked on, value types from reification will make a huge difference. It would have saved us so much effort in just spending weeks dealing with garbage collection issues that have just gone away. So that is my wish list. They're working on it already, but I cannot wait for it. I'm ready to retire after I see it, and I hope I stay alive long enough to see that feature before I quit the field. So that's my vote for value types with reification of generics.
Thank you, Venkat. I like it. Thank you.
Pretty fulfilled answer. Yeah, thanks a lot. And probably I have a question, one more question from me. Yeah, and what do you think about this string template story? I saw that it's dropped. It's designed for a few years and then it's dropped because they want to redesign API and the entire concept. What do you think about that?
I love it. I love it. Honestly, when I saw that, what went through my mind was, hey, this is great. Java has string template. But at the same time, my thought was also, oh, I think this could be a lot, better. I kind of felt a bit of a ceremony in the way that string template was being brought in. And in all genuine honesty, I'm not surprised that it has gone back to the drawing board. It is a very useful feature. It's a feature that's been in other languages. Honestly, right now in Java, we can be okay without it right now because we already have the format functions and formatted functions that do a fairly decent job. So I don't feel like there is a immediate urgency towards it. So when it does come in, it's got to be really good. So honestly, I'm really glad it's gone back to the drawing table.
Yeah, great that they want to deliver it not as it is and just because everyone wants that feature, but to make it kind of perfect. Yeah,
that goes back to the whole agility that I really feel. To me, that is the whole idea of being truly agile, is feedback driven. And this is one of the beautiful things, right? Software has the observer effect. The minute you design something and build it, you see it in action, you got 1,000 ideas of how it can be better. In a lot of ways, software is like cooking. You don't just cook food and deliver and walk away, right? You cook food and you dip your fingers into it, lick it, and see if it's got enough salt. Is it, in my case, does it have enough spice? And I want to know it actually tastes really well, and you want to make adjustments to it. And that is the nature of the software field. In all honesty, almost anything humans do has to evolve, because the minute we create it, we find ways to improve it. And the idea here is not that things need to be improved. It is the willingness to recognize it has to be improved. And that is the sheer willingness I see in the Java community. And that is what I really respect in seeing, that they are willing to try, willing to experiment, willing to improve. And that to me is where the power really is.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for sharing your perspective and thoughts on those various topics, and for fully cover answer for such great questions. And thanks again for your presentation. Looking forward for the next time that we can have you on our event. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much again for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's work for the freedom of Ukraine. Amazing developers. So many friends over there. I cannot wait to be there in person and hug everyone that I come across. So thanks again. Stay strong, and looking forward to being there in the future.
Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thank you.